Bore da. Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased that Darryl can do this. I'm really excited about this event. To have a veterinary school in Wales is such a privilege, and to have this partnership starting already, I can see it being one of the most important things for Serin going forward. So welcome to the first Serin partnership event with Aberystwyth University Veterinary School. We are really excited that Welsh students like yourselves will be able to study veterinary science for the first time in Wales going forward, and also be at the vanguard of Welsh vets coming out of Aberystwyth. If you're accepted onto the course, you'll be some of the first people to be trained in a vet school in Wales. This is a national event. Again, I'm so excited to see people from all across Wales. I think the standard of the people who are applying is clearly very high, and I really hope you get what you need out of this event. And I'm sure if we want to ask any questions during the event or after, we'll try our best to satisfy that. Okay, Dewi?
Fantastic. Thanks, Julian. And just to reiterate, Julian's welcome, really, on behalf of the University at Aberystwyth University. It's great to have so many of you with us today, as mentioned, from literally every corner of Wales. We are excited as a university by the fact that we'll be the first veterinary school here in Wales. And I can promise you, from the information you'll receive from Professor Aberystwyth this morning, you will gain a massive amount from this webinar, and will definitely be inspired, but also get to know what's needed to become a vet and understand what the training and vocation really involves. Okay, just to quickly get some of the ins and outs out of the way, as I've done recently, and apologies to those who have joined and already heard this. This session is being recorded, as you can see from the red button in the top left hand corner. Literally just for being used on the university website, and we also have an online resources hub for sixth form students, so we will probably put that up on there, so we'll share that link with you a little bit later on. It is intended to be an interactive session. After all, that's what we're all about here in Aberystwyth, in both lecture, seminar and practical formats. Darryl explained this obviously in terms of the veterinary school as well. There will be questions posed throughout, and we'd like you to pose questions during the course of the webinar, but we'll also have a question and answer format essentially at the end of this webinar as well. Just as explained to you in the email, there are two ways you can engage in the session, either over the mic or chat. I see most already done so, but if you could put an M in front of your name if you're prepared to speak over the mic, or a C in front of your name if only by chat. We'll then relay, so both Julian and I will relay some of this information to Darryl as we go along. All the information in the chat won't be shared, as mentioned, so feel free to comment and pose any question. There are no stupid questions, okay? This is all about getting the information about becoming a vet and getting information about the new veterinary school here in Wales and the partnership we have with RVC as well. I'd like to emphasise from a Welsh language perspective, croeso mawr I rai o'ch chi sydd yn siarad o Cymraeg. Bydd Darryl yn cyflwyno Saesneg, gan ei fod e'n dod o dde Africa, ac yn fodlon ateb unrhyw gwestiwn yn African. Ond os oes gennych chi unrhyw gwestiwn yn chi am ofyn yng Nghymraeg i fi ar y chat neu dros y mic, mae croeso chi wneud hynny, and I roi gwybod I Darryl y cwestiwn. Just saying, Darryl, and everyone, that you're not quite fluent in Welsh yet, but can share some African if there are any questions in that language. But I can also relay any questions through the medium of Welsh. And I know you want to explain some elements of this later on as well. Anyway, enough of me going on and on. I don't want to give anything away in terms of Professor Aberystwyth's background, as I know he'll explain to you a lot about this. And having worked alongside him for a couple of months, he's a thoroughly nice man. We're really fortunate to have him with us here in Aber, leading our veterinary school as mentioned. So yeah, over to you, Darryl.
Zoe, thank you very much. Good morning, folks. Really nice to meet all of you. I can't see you, of course. You will see from and hear from my accent that I'm not quite Welsh. The accent comes from a mixture of Northern Irish, Irish, and Africa. So I come from now from South Africa. And we've really come for an exciting project. So I've come from another veterinary faculty. It's the only veterinary faculty in South Africa. Most veterinary faculties are have a lot of similarities, though they have some differences. The one I came from took about 190 students a year. It's the only one in the country, and therefore had a huge responsibility because essentially it trained all the vets for the country. So this is not too different. We've now started, or we will be starting, the first vet school, and it'll be the only vet school in Wales. So that's quite exciting. So where are we going? In terms of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about what vets do. I'm sure you've got your own impressions, and maybe they're from television, maybe you've worked with your local vet, maybe you have very little understanding, but I want to explain what that does. What does it take to become a vet? And then I'm sure most of you are thinking, if you're going to apply, well, let's talk about, how can we optimize your chances of success in applying? It's very difficult to get into veterinary school. So how do we improve that? And there are a couple of things about why Aber, and we will have lots of question opportunities. So we'll break periodically. We'll also have a question time at the end. And so feel free to either put a question on the chat, or we can have a verbal question later on. Before we do that, I want to ask a couple of questions from my side. So there's a mate of mine. His name is Jacques Adel. He's a vet in South Africa. I went with him when we were working with, which I'm sure you'll realize now is a rhino. What's he doing? Why has that rhino lost its horns? Why are they purple? Whoops, let's just go back a second. What's this thing? Here on the side of the neck. I put the slide in because I want to show you some cool things sometimes some vets do. I'm really jealous of this friend of mine because this is the sort of thing he gets to doing. So he's tranquilized this rhinoceros. And he's tranquilized it because he has to remove the horns. Now, a rhino horn is more expensive than gold. Ounce for ounce, it's more expensive than gold. And they take the horns off to try and prevent poaching. This game reserve, which is just outside Pretoria in South Africa, had lost 3 rhinos in the previous 2 years to poaching. So what they do is they cut the horn. The horn is only really like dense hair or nail. It's made of keratin, so they can cut it if they do it carefully without causing any pain or discomfort. So this is one type of role of a vet. Here he's tranquilized it. You can see in that left-hand picture, there's the dart just sticking out. The drug tranquilizes it, so the rhino almost acts drunk. He's aware of what's going on, but he can't really get his muscles to work. And you can see on the right-hand picture, there's a rope around. They've put a cloth over its eyes to stop it being too scared. And we have to hold on to the rope. And it's very important that when the rhino goes down, he doesn't go onto his side because that will compromise his breathing. But he goes down vertically, what's called sternal recumbency. So here you can see the rhino lying down. He's got a plug in his ear. And there they're using a very delicate instrument called a chainsaw, which looks very crude, but it's very skilled. And actually, Jacques, this is him here in the picture, and with a helmet on, removing the horn, he's actually doing his PhD at the moment on how to safely remove these horns in the rhino. Why am I telling you that? Not only because it's quite a cool job, I think, that he does, and it's maybe something you haven't seen before, but he's got a lot of concerns. He's got to make sure that he has the right level of drug in that rhino. Too much, and he can actually kill the animal. Too little, and it's a risk to the people around if that rhino gets up too soon. He's got to be very concerned that the rhino's breathing stays the same. It used to be that maybe 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 20 rhinos actually died during these type of operations because the drugs would affect their systems differently. So he's got to monitor that animal the whole time to make sure that its welfare is not compromised. It's breathing well. And the picture I showed you right at the beginning was him about to what we call wake the rhino up. So he was going to put an injection of an antidote to the tranquilizer in that rhino's ear. Let me share another slide and ask you another question. 2 pictures, left and right. What's the difference between them? Have a look here. You can see this mound over here. You see another mound. You see all these little spikes, which are actually penguins. This is the same picture taken, same site, same area, taken a year later. Look at the difference. This is the birdie, one of my favorite birds, called the African penguin. Quite bizarrely, Those previous pictures were taken in Namibia, which is just north of South Africa, where the daytime temperatures are 40, 45 degrees. Quite bizarre that a penguin can live that far north. This bird only occurs off the southern African coast. And over the last 100 years, its population has dropped by 98%. A very strong possibility that in 50 to 60 years' time, there will be no more African penguins. Why has that happened? Well, there's a whole pile of factors. It used to be in the 1920s, this thing on the right here called guano collection was the key factor. They used to go to the islands where these penguins largely breed, and they would scrape off all the dung, all the feces, what's called guano, because they discovered it was fantastic for fertilizer. And all around the world, penguin colonies were being invaded to remove the guano. And the guano is very important. Sometimes that guano could be 3 meters high. And the penguins burrow into it for their nest. So when they remove the guano, not only does it cause huge disturbance, but also it removes the nesting sites for the birds. And they also collected eggs to be used on the table. And that caused in the 1910, 20, 30s, massive reduction in the population. But there's a whole pile of other factors, and I'll talk about penguins all day long, but we won't do that. Why am I mentioning it? Well, one of the threats to penguins is disease. And about 2 years ago, the people working on these islands off Namibia, they're quite remote, they hadn't visited for a while, they discovered that massive numbers of penguins were dying. You can see all the dead penguins in this top photograph. Why am I telling you that? Well, in the previous picture, you saw that the vet had a role to play with a pretty exciting animal called the rhino that was also endangered. But his role there was really looking at the individual animal. He was concerned about that particular rhino. Here the vet has a different challenge, because now not only is the vet concerned about the individual animal, in this case a penguin, so some of the penguins that were sick, they would try to be removed to be treated, but he has she has a much greater concern, which is how much disease is spreading among those penguins and how can the disease be stopped. And in this case, the picture, quite a macabre picture, I'm sorry about it, but that's what vets do. All the penguin carcasses had to be collected and burnt on site to try and stop the disease spreading. What are we doing about it? Well, we hope to do a big survey. The map, you can see this is southern Africa on the southern part of the African continent. These little red marks here show where the colonies are. And we're doing a big survey of penguins. We had meant to start it by now, but because of the coronavirus, we've had to delay. And my job here is to design a survey that is scientifically robust. In other words, we collect sufficient penguins to answer some very important questions. We catch the penguin, we take a blood sample, and the penguin then is immediately released. So it's no harm to the penguin, but that blood gives us some opportunities to test for a range of diseases, including the one that was killing those penguins, called avian influenza. Why am I saying that? Well, here you can see the focus is not only on the individual animal, but is on the whole flock and trying to stop a disease, in this case, basically wiping out a population. So that just illustrates there are different types of veterinary work. And I think one of the most exciting things about being a vet is just that opportunity to engage in all different species and all different disciplines. There are vets who work with clinical work. In other words, they're focused on treating disease, preventing disease, or looking after individual animals. And they have some pretty fun things to do. Here you can see a dog in a water bath, you can see a horse on a treadmill, and you can see an operating theatre that would be just the same as a human operating theatre, except there is an animal on the table. And of course, vets can work with all types of species, including some of those exciting wild animals. They also work with farm animals. They work with dogs and cats and pets, as I'm sure you're aware. But they also do some other pretty extreme things. In the top picture, you can see a group of veterinary students helping a vet save the life of a cow for a farmer who can't afford the services. So this is a part of the world where the people are very poor, and some vets give up their time for free to go out and help with programs to support poor farmers who rely on animals for their survival. The lady down below is putting a tag into a calf, and she's helping the farmers. She's helping teach them how to rear their calves successfully so they don't die when they're young. The lady in the middle is called Michelle Miller, and she is actually taking the pulse of an African elephant. Now, just like the rhino, that elephant is not dead, it's just tranquilized. And she's taking its pulse because she's monitoring to make sure that everything's working well. And she's interested in taking samples from that elephant because she's looking for a dangerous disease called tuberculosis. You'll have heard perhaps of human TB. Animals get TB. Most times animals get cattle TB. Elephants are actually quite susceptible to human TB. So she's busy looking for that disease, but she has to tranquilize the elephant with a dart gun from a helicopter. And now she's just making sure that the elephant is not coming to any harm. But then there's a whole pile of other jobs that vets do. Some vets work in abattoirs. Maybe sounds macabre, but it's very clinical. Their job is to make sure the animal's welfare is fine. And they're making sure that the food that you and I eat is safe and healthy and fit for consumption. Some vets work in government agencies to regulate animal health programs or the export or import of animals or animal products. Others work for pharmaceutical companies making drugs or tests or feeds for animals. So you can see the range of activities of a vet can be very wide. And I think that makes the job actually very interesting and quite exciting. Just going to pause here, just for those of you interested in birds. That's a tawny eagle, and we were catching it to, again, look for avian influenza, but also to take measurements because that bird is also endangered and in serious decline. So let me stop now and just see, are there any questions you might want to ask about anything we've covered so far?
Yeah, so as mentioned at the beginning, if anybody at present does have a question, then you're very welcome to put in the chat or to speak over the mic. One question that has come, can this webinar be accessed later? If you are having issues, we've had one or two mention that they're having issues, but yes, this is being recorded, so it will be, we will be able to share it, and we'll be putting it up on our online resources hub here at Aberystwyth University as well, which I'll share later on. Okay, Jovan. If anybody else has any questions at present, then please do so in the mic. I know we will have quite a lot of information coming pretty soon, so I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions a bit later on. But at present, well, actually, we do have one question from Mayur, Darrell. Are there any volunteer programs in South Africa?
Lots. There are lots and lots of programs. Sometimes they may not be with vets specifically, but there are lots of animal organizations that look after particularly wild animals. There are also lots of animal agencies, just like here, the SPCA, dog programs, donkey programs. You can go and help look after baboons. You can work in wildlife refuges. There's huge numbers of opportunities. Just need to be careful, make sure that you check them out properly. Don't go after the first one that you find. You must look after your own safety. And some of the programs, they actually charge you to go work. Others, they don't charge you. They give you food and lodging, but then you pay in terms of the labor that you provide.
Brilliant. There's one more. Corey, I'm going to come back to you later with regard to the A-levels question, because there is a question from Corey about what A-levels are needed, and I know Darrell will be covering that in a lot more detail in terms of entry requirements and what you need to do, possibly if you're in year 11 or currently in year 12. There is one more question, a very good question. Do you have to select focus on one of those sectors, i.e. clinical, farms or wider scale, or can you do a general one learning about all of the sectors?
That's a great question. All veterinary programs around the world agree on one thing, that they want to give their graduates the opportunity to go into any discipline when they graduate. So in other words, there is no specialization before you graduate with your primary degree. So you cover all the species. Now, the reality of programs is there's very little time to focus on these more exotic animals that I've shown you. So most of the focus is on cats and dogs and cattle and sheep and pigs and poultry. But you also cover a little bit on the exotics and on reptiles and things like that. you then tend to specialize after you graduate. Many applicants to vet school change their mind while they're doing their studies. Some want to come in and they want to work with cats and dogs, and they end up working with cattle. Some come in wanting to work with wildlife, and they end up working on cats and dogs. So many people change their mind, and that's fine. In the last year or 2 years of the vet program, then you get the opportunity to put a little bit more time into a species of choice. So if you're very keen on horses, you can take an extra number of weeks focusing just on horses and to enhance your knowledge. But you all graduate with the same degree, and you then have the opportunity of specializing later on.
Fantastic. Thanks again for that, Darryl. We have one more question from Catherine. I think possibly, though, you are going to cover this. So Catherine's question is, do you need work experience in both animal husbandry and within a vet practice? We're going to come to that later on, aren't we, Darryl? So I think we leave that at the moment, if you don't mind. We've also got another question from Myra. Do you need to do training or obtain another degree to work with exotic animals? I don't know whether you want to answer that now, Darryl, or potentially...
Okay, I can answer that quickly. It's also a great question. In general, you don't need to specialize when you graduate. And some people become general practitioners, and then they work in a practice that may have specialists or may receive exotic animals, or they work with wild animals. In general, if you want to focus on a particular species, or like wild animals as a group of animals, it's always advisable to get a postgraduate degree. And that's where after graduation, you might work for 2 or 3 years in that field with guidance, and then you become registered as a specialist. But you don't have to. You can still have the opportunity of working with these animals without the need to specialize.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for now, that's it. Catherine and Corey's question, we will be coming to that a little bit later on, so I promise we will cover those areas.
Allai just gofyn un cwestiwn gyflym?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah.
Gennych chi unrhyw volunteer programs os chi'n argymell, neu links i mynd atyn nhw, neu enwau cwmni?
Yeah, Darryl, do you have any volunteer programs that we would encourage then at present, or not? Sorry, who asked that question? Apologies. Who was that? Yeah. Diolch, thank you. Diolch.
No, there's none that we would particularly endorse. My suggestion is, if you are interested, just find out from the website who the agency or the organization is associated with. And from that, you might want to contact them independently. There are very reputable agencies, organizations who are looking for volunteers, and they will tell you, if they're good quality, how you can find out about them and the work that they do. But there's none that we specifically endorse.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, yeah, if you want to potentially move on now, Darryl.
Okay, excellent. And please, if I speak too quickly, just put your hand up or shout out at me in Welsh or something like that. I get excited, especially when I talk about penguins, that maybe I speak too fast with my wonderful accent. Okay, so let's ask the next question. What does it take to become a vet? And you may be surprised that the very first point I want to raise with you is personality. Not everybody is cut out to be a vet. And sometimes I think TV programs, in a sense, do veterinary science a little bit of an injustice, because they tend to show lots of cuddly little animals and lots of happy people. Obviously, vets want to make a difference with animals. And of course, it's also very important, they want to make an impact in people's lives. And that's an important point to emphasize, because being a vet does not only mean that you get to work with animals, but you have to work with the people who own or look after those animals, be it a poor farmer in a developing part of the world, be it a fragile elderly person with their beloved dog or cat, be it a farmer who has to make money out of the animals that he or she has. So personality is very important. Veterinary science, like medicine, is called a caring profession because you care for animals. And really, vets are really people who are what I call decisive but flexible. When you go onto a farm or you stand in front of a client with their dog, a vet must be able to make a decision. It doesn't mean that they have to make the decision immediately, but they must not be scared of making decisions. And they have to be flexible. It might be they have to say to the farmer, Mr. Farmer or Miss Farmer, we have to take samples, I'll come back to you because we've got to be sure of the diagnosis. Or maybe they have to be firm with the client and say, listen, your dog is suffering, and really the best thing for your dog is to put it to sleep. And that's tough to do. And it takes a certain personality type to be like that. Most vets are very determined people. Sometimes that has baggage. When I was heading up my previous school, I used to say to our first year students that we used to have the brightest students in the country, but they came with baggage. They tend to be very determined, self-driven, and sometimes, dare I say it, arrogant. Of course, there's nobody like that in Wales. You guys, none of you is arrogant. I know that. But people skills and handling people and being able to work in teams is a very important part of being a vet. And why I say that at the outset is being a vet isn't the only profession where you work with animals. You'll see, and we'll probably talk about it later, Aberystwyth offers a veterinary bioscience degree. So does the Royal Vet College, where you get to work with animals just in a slightly different context. Some people like to work with animals because they want to do research. I have to be honest, when I applied to vet science, it wasn't to work with cats and dogs. I was really keen to chase elephants through the bush. I wanted to do research. And the fewer people there were, the better. And I had to change my attitude and change my style pretty quickly because I realized how important people skills were. Then it comes to academics. The reality is, because veterinary programs are so oversubscribed and because the course is difficult, we tend to look for students who have high marks. Does that mean that people with high marks always make good vets? No. But it's just one way of selecting people who are more likely to succeed in a very difficult course and who are more likely to be able to make those tough decisions and keep up with the pressure of the job once they graduate. So I'm going to talk generally about standards. Some of them will apply just to Aberystwyth, but for general in the schools, most vet schools will insist on 3 A's or 2 A's and a B at A levels. And that's quite tough. And those have to be in certain subjects. So they ask for certainly biology, chemistry, and then one other, maybe maths, physics, or something else like that. Some schools, and Aberystwyth and Royal Vet College are the same, where they ask for GCSE subjects at a certain level, as you can see in front of you, that you need 5 at grade 7 or grade A. It must include combined science or biology and chemistry, or at least a grade 6 or a B in English, maths, and or physics. If you want more, and certainly there's the Welsh Baccalaureate and all the other school subjects and school degrees qualifications, look on the website, on our website, and you'll find all the answers to what standards are needed. This applies to us. Other vet schools may have different levels, different thresholds, different criteria. So you must go look on their website to find out what they want. And I'll give you some links in a little while. And then my final point on the slide is to just have a word of warning, which is what I started with at the beginning, which is that you may have the impression that if you haven't had much exposure to vets and it's based on TV, that it's standing and making an animal in a client, or sorry, the animal belonging to a client, happy and healthy. That's lovely, and they're wonderful stories. But sometimes that conveys the wrong impression of what a vet does. When a vet certainly goes to a farm, be it a dairy farm, be it a poultry farm, where the farmer is dependent on producing livestock for food or for animal products or something like that, then the vet's focus is not so much on the individual animal, but it's on the whole herd. So he or she must make sure the animals are producing well, that they're healthy, that they're being well looked after, and that any disease that might happen is prevented. That's called herd health, where the vet is focused on the whole unit and to make sure that they produce as best as they can without compromising their welfare. Vets also have to work in teams, and what's very clear in recent years is that when vets go onto farms now, particularly when they work in wildlife or in other areas like that, they cannot do everything. It used to be, particularly when I graduated way back in the Middle Ages, the vet did everything. Vet went onto the farm, he advised on nutrition, he advised on water quality, he advised on pasture, he advised on ecology, he advised on environmental stuff, he even advised on human diseases. And what's become much clearer in recent years is that when people work in teams with what's called a multidisciplinary team, things get much better. And nowadays, therefore, vets work with ecologists, they work with nutritionists, they might work with animal physiologists, they will have technical people supporting the work that they do. And it's when that team works well together that the farmer or the client is serviced best. And that's the concept of One Health. And it's a very important one for vets to take on board. So if you're thinking veterinary science is just you working on your own, some vets do work like that. Sometimes they have no choice. Maybe they work in a very remote practice. But most times now vets work very much as part of a team. What must I have to apply? Again, let me emphasize, you must check out the individual school requirements. That's very important. Almost, I think all schools ask through UCAS for a personal statement. They don't all necessarily use it, but for virtually all of them, it's a requirement that you must submit it. And some people have a great confusion as to what is required and what they must write and how long it must be. A couple of important points. Make sure it's personal. Remember, when the people who are reviewing those forms read them, most of them are going to have people talking about their experiences and how wonderful it is and how fantastic it is being a vet. What makes the things stand out? Those applications, those statements that are about you as a person tend to stand out. We want to know why you will benefit the veterinary profession, what contribution you will make to veterinary science or to Wales or to the UK. From that, we want to find out how motivated you are. What drives you? What are your motivations? And it's not, I saw a fluffy kitten on TV. It's much deeper in terms of, why do you want to be a vet? What's going to make you keep going when the going gets tough, when the program gets tough? Or if you're on a farm and the wind is belting and the rain is pouring down and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you've been out lambing 3 nights in a row. Or maybe you're standing in front of an elderly lady and this dog is all she's got in the world and she loves that dog, and you've got to tell her that it's in the best interests of that dog for you to put it to sleep. Those are tough things, tough times. And we want to understand, how do you work in those sorts of environments? And then we're also very interested in looking at your achievements. By definition, if you've applied to vet science, you'll know what the grades are, so your grades will be good. So we're looking generally for achievements that go beyond just the grades, and particularly those that are extramural. Where have you shown leadership? Where have you shown community spirit? Where have you lent a hand that is maybe outside the animal world? Those are the sorts of things that allow us to see what qualities the applicants have when they apply. We then also ask for work experience, and I think all but maybe one of the schools actually make it a criterion. Vet schools in the UK differ as to how much time you need to spend on it. Some ask for as little as 1 or 2 weeks, others may take it 6 weeks or even longer. So again, check out the individual schools' requirements when you're thinking of veterinary science. 2 important points. First of all, if you exceed the school's requirements, so if the school says, we want 4 weeks, as we do ask at Aberystwyth, and there must be 2 weeks at least in veterinary and 2 weeks in animal husbandry or animal caring, you get no more brownie points for saying that you do 3 months or 6 months or 5 years. Sometimes applicants find that difficult to understand. They think that if they say, well, I've worked every day at the vet for the last 5 years, or I've spent the last 3 months working at the practice, that will get them more brownie points for the application. It actually doesn't. It's a good thing to do. Don't get me wrong. The more time you spend with vets, the more time you spend working with animals, the better you understand yourself, the better you get exposed to what vets do, and that helps you make an informed choice. But in terms of selection, you don't get any more marks for doing more than what the schools require. So the second point I want to make on this point is very important. Don't, for goodness sake, neglect your studies. Some people say, oh, well, I studied less in my final years because I really put the time into work experience. Don't neglect your studies, because you will get no extra value in terms of the application process for doing the additional weeks. Remember, we're in the middle of coronavirus, and schools are very aware that students might not have the opportunity to do and get the weeks of experience that they need. If that's the case, if you have applied to, say, work on a farm or work with the RSPCA or work in a practice, and because of coronavirus you were prevented, do two things. First of all, make sure you check out what the school's website says about coronavirus. Most of the schools have got a comment on or something up on the website saying how they're going to measure it or rate it. What we're likely to do, we're still confirming, because we want to work in parallel with the Royal Vet College, and I'll explain just now why. We're busy clarifying what our position is. I think what it's going to be is that when you do your personal statement, we're going to ask you, if you can't finish all your work experience, to put something in there to say, I would have applied for it, this is what I intended to do, why I intended to do it, and I couldn't do it because coronavirus stopped me. And this is what I did instead. So maybe you want to read up on the website, maybe you want to find out more about a particular animal health problem, maybe you want to download some materials and work through those, but just to show that you have replaced that experience with some other teaching type opportunities and materials. And I can give you some reading lists that you might want to work through. We haven't yet decided, but it's also likely, and I think other schools will ask us, that if you can't make up the time now before you apply, then you can apply and you will have opportunity to do those additional weeks later on after you've applied. And the school will give you time to do that, and we'll pick that up later on if and when they make an offer. When you do your work experience, remember it has to be varied. So if you say, well, I worked in a small animal practice down the bottom of the road for the full time, you will lose marks, because we really are looking for variety. So it's usually 2 weeks in a vet practice and 2 weeks in a non-vet. And by non-vet, that could be stables, it could be kennels, it could be an RSPCA or one of the other animal help institutes or rehabilitation centers. It could be in a sanctuary. It also should include something to do with the euthanasia or killing of animals. Why do we say that? Well, it used to be that some people came to vet school and they'd never actually seen a dead animal or an animal die. And when they experienced that, maybe during their vet program, they just gave up vet science. They couldn't take it, because it's not everybody who can handle that. And so we ask for maybe a day, half a day, some experience or exposure that you've had, maybe in a vet practice, maybe somewhere else, to experiencing what it's like to have an animal either put down or being killed, usually for human consumption. Because so many applicants apply for vet science, and because the grades are so high, most but not all vet schools run interviews. If you apply to Aberystwyth or the Royal Vet College, your first application will obviously be through UCAS. And if you make that grade, some of you will then be selected, hopefully all of you, but the select number who meets the criteria, and the top group of those applicants will then be invited for interview. And what we're going to do at Aberystwyth and what happens at the RVC is you will have essentially maybe 6 mini interviews where you'll spend 5 to 10 minutes at each station and you'll have to ask questions. Some schools only have a single interview. We tend to have multiple. What's the purpose? The purpose there is not to test so much your knowledge, because we're going to give you lots of knowledge. We're going to plug you full of knowledge. We're actually much more interested in personality, in motivation, and experience. So you might get some questions asked about your work experience. Maybe they'll ask you questions about coronavirus. Maybe they'll ask you questions about the environment. Just relax. I know it sounds terribly daunting and maybe quite terrifying, but the purpose is not to give you a drilling. There's no exam that you have to pass or fail. The focus is very much about trying to understand who you are as a person, what your personality traits are, and whether the interviewers think you will make a good veterinarian. How do you apply? Well, in case you haven't seen websites, here are some pointers, and because this is being recorded and will be available, you can always pick it up later. But the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, they've got a whole pile of information on veterinary careers, becoming a vet nursing, or doing vet nursing or something else like that. UCAS themselves will give you links to vet schools. If you go on to Veterinary Record Careers, so the Veterinary Record is the journal that is put out by the British Veterinary Association. That's essentially the union that works for vets. And they have a journal called the Veterinary Record. And you can access that online if you Google things like Vet Record Careers. And they actually go through school by school. And they will actually show you all the requirements. This one's dated. That's why it doesn't have Aberystwyth. It should be on there soon. But you can find a lot of information there. And of course, in terms of our own program, by all means, come onto our website. It should give you all the information that you need in terms of requirements, in terms of what it's like, in terms of what you'll do, and then you'll be able to also access further help if you need it. Okay, I'm going to stop there again and just briefly pause to see if there are any additional questions or to go back to those who asked questions before that I haven't covered in the session.
Yeah, please do so. Obviously, hopefully you've answered some questions regarding the in fantastic detail regarding the entry requirements that are needed. We'll share, as we say, we'll put into the chat in a second the link to our veterinary science course. There are a couple of questions coming through, Darrell, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One is from Sky. Some universities offer prelim years for students who haven't taken all of the necessary A-levels. Do you recommend these?
Yes, sometimes just be aware of what they offer. Some programs like the Royal Vet College offer what they call a gateway program. And that's generally for students who might not have had the opportunity of getting all the requirements to enter a vet program. And very often the reason is that these applicants maybe come from schools that maybe didn't have the resources or offer those particular programs. They're good. You can certainly do it. It does add another year to your studies. Those programs generally are aimed at trying to widen access. What does that mean? Well, the reality is, unfortunately, like many professional degrees, people who come from backgrounds where there's money, where parents can afford to send them to good schools, or they live in a good area, or they have the opportunity to go and work and get lots of good experience, they obviously do better than maybe school students who don't have those opportunities. Maybe they live in lower socioeconomic areas, etc. And therefore, we're very conscious that the veterinary profession maybe attracting students from only certain parts of the socioeconomic scale of people, in this case, in the United Kingdom. And because we want to make the profession as diverse as possible, we certainly want to help students who might be disadvantaged because of their background. These gateway programs offer that access. So they're not really there if you didn't do physics and now you want to do physics and that sort of thing. There you should maybe go and reset A-level, go to a college and do something like that. But they are a great way if you do come from that type of background and you want access to the program that you can apply for it.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a really comprehensive answer, I think. We have got a couple of others coming through. Darryl, are you happy to take that? Yeah,
Sure.
take them. We will obviously have certainly a Q&A at the end. We've allocated the time. Corey just wants to clarify what grades are needed for GCSE, Darryl. I know it's obviously all students here, I believe, are, well, obviously through sharing, are studying here in Wales. So, yeah, do you mind just quickly sharing the
I'm just
requirements?
So you will need definitely the subjects. I'm just going to show you exactly what the website covers. So what we say on the website is you're going to require 5 GCSEs at grade 7, including a 7/7 in combined science, or an AA in science double award, or biology and chemistry, or science and additional science. So in other words, in terms of the grades, you'll need 5 of them at grade 7, and a minimum of grade 6 will be required in English and maths.
So
And of
here,
course,
I believe it's a B, isn't it? It's B is
in old
equivalent to
language,
the...
it's a B, quite right.
Yes, yeah.
And of course, there's also a provision made for Welsh language as well alongside that.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I quickly mention, I know that Darryl did mention quickly about the Welsh Baccalaureate as well. The one thing you are at an advantage massively in terms of the Welsh Baccalaureate when applying to vet schools, potentially in comparison with students potentially across the bridge, is remember with your individual projects, and this is applicable to year 11 students as well as year 12, obviously now starting their individual projects for going into year 13. I understand that not everybody is doing the Welsh Baccalaureate possibly, but that project, obviously, you get to write about anything you want. We massively encourage, and this is applicable to all subject areas, but probably more so in subjects like veterinary science, like medicine, to base your project on something to do with veterinary science. Because when it will come to interview, you have something then you can speak about as well. You know, Darryl, they mentioned about the fact that due to COVID-19, you know, you are going to be missing out potentially on some work experience. Well, this is an opportunity on paper for you to show the vet schools exactly what you researched into and what really interests you. So that's very, very important. We will be giving some advice actually next week. We have got a session on the individual project as a webinar, which again I'll share with you next week with the National Library of Wales and also the CNR, the Welsh Parliament. So we've got a workshop happening next week just to give you some advice with regard to the project as well. Okay, guys. I am taking away. Sorry, apologies, Darryl.
Can I come in there, Derry?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Look, my experience from this is not specifically veterinary science, but all subjects are very competitive courses in universities. Most people are going to get good grades. Your work experience is one thing with veterinary, but what will separate you is if you've done some research yourself. And the Welsh Bac is a vehicle for that. And I've been trying to set up for some subjects some small group work with some PhD students and things. I don't want to put Darryl on the spot here, but those sorts of things I think give you a real chance to find things out in depth about what you're going to study. You know, I just give a law example before I be quiet. One of my students wanted to study law at a very competitive university. She looked into the way different legal systems treat children who kill. Pretty grim, but actually that's what she mostly talked about in the interview. So I think that level of detail is really useful. So don't dismiss the back, and I think it's a really good way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Darryl, let me know, there's quite a few questions come through here.
Sure.
So William asks, if you work towards being a vet and you don't get the grades, what would you recommend doing? Any other animal oriented jobs, for instance?
It's a great question, and it's the sort of question that everybody who runs a vet school gets haunted by, because there are so many people who want to do vet science, and there's not places for everybody. So it varies from person to person. What some people do is they go and do, like what we offer at Aberystwyth, a bioscience degree, or they do a BSc degree in a related field, maybe biology or zoology, and they keep applying. Now, some vet schools will take people in with 1 or 2 years of a science degree, like the bioscience degree. Other vet schools tend to say, well, once you start the degree, you must finish the degree, and then we will consider you for what they call the accelerated program. And so the Royal Vet College, for example, will take students in from year 3, and those are students who have already completed a science-based degree. It doesn't have to be science-based. The criteria are then around, do they have the subjects that are necessary to do vet science, and they tend to be science-based subjects. So my advice is, yeah, if you want to, don't give up, certainly if you don't get in the first time, do something associated, and you may find that actually you so enjoy doing it, you continue doing it, and you don't get into vet science. And unfortunately, you may find that you don't get into vet science, and therefore at least then you have some other qualification behind you where you can work with animals still, or in a zoological setting, or even with vets. There's lots of other jobs you can do, maybe in a more research or a more applied setting, and you're not going to lose out because you didn't get into vet science.
Brilliant.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Dara. We've also gosh, there's a couple of questions come through. One question from Catherine. So if you cannot get any experience with the small animals, are you at a major disadvantage? So Catherine is saying she currently volunteers at a farm, cattle and sheep, but couldn't branch out into domestic animals due to the current circumstances.
So the blunt answer is you are at a disadvantage because we really want that variety. But because of Corona, we accept that there's going to be constraints. So what I would say is maybe contact a small animal vet and ask them, can you book in something now for maybe December time later on in the year, and put that in your statement or in your application that you have booked this time, and you can show proof that you've booked it, and it's only because you haven't been able to, because of coronavirus, get that experience.
Brilliant. Again, yeah, thank you. I hope, yeah, that answers your question, Catherine. Kerry Ann is asking, and I think, yeah, Julian's kind of confirmed this. If I have taken biology and chemistry A level, but my third is in geography, would a high grade in this be acceptable? I believe that is the case, Darryl, generally, isn't
Yep.
it? There is a question, obviously, as well from down as ABM. Would the grade requirements change if you take 4 A levels in the Welsh back? Good question. We'll have to look into that, actually.
No, I just don't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I haven't been here long enough to find out all the answers to those questions yet. But I think we will find out and go back to them.
Yes, we will. We'll certainly. Yeah, we will do that, and through Julia, and again, we'll certainly make sure you get that before before applying. Molly, in terms of the EPQ, as Julian has mentioned, the EPQ is basically replicates the individual project element of the Welsh Baccalaureate. So yes, it would be the same essentially as doing the Welsh Bac individual. There's slight differences within it. You have to complete some of the things, but generally very similar. You can obviously write about anything you want and base it on veterinary science then. That's all the questions at the moment, Darryl. And I know you've got quite a few other things to go through. Yeah, back over to you.
Can just before we move on, can I just emphasize again the question about geography? I think it's wonderful that applicants also do something that's not directly related to animals. And I just want to reassure people that there's no discrimination made. You don't need the all 3 subjects related to life sciences. You can do, like in this case, geography, and you certainly won't be penalized. It's only the grade that you get is the determinant, not that composition. So it's that the chemistry option is the important one, and the biology, those are the essential ones. The third one can be from a variety of other subjects. Okay, let's go on. So what does the degree look like? Are we okay for time, Dewey? We're quite late. So let me move, maybe I'm going to up the pace a little bit, but the questions are great. And I'm very happy to answer as many questions as I can. what does a typical vet course look like? In the UK, courses tend to be 5 or 6 years. They're undergraduate courses. I think only one school now in the UK runs a 6-year program. All others are 5 years. And they tend to follow the same format. So the first couple of years tend to be what they call preclinical. These are foundation subjects. These are things like microbiology. You learn about how animal systems work. You learn about the anatomy of an animal. You learn about how the heart works, how the alimentary system works. You learn about how a cow's stomach will differ from a horse's stomach, which will differ from a dog's stomach. That's what makes that's why we vets think we're far superior to doctors. I shouldn't really say that publicly, should I? But it's only because we've got lots of animals to deal with. And then from years 3 to 4, the focus then becomes more on what's called clinical. In other words, we now tend to focus on animals getting sick, animals staying healthy, animal welfare, and how those animals work. And then in year 5, sometimes from year 4, you get to do a lot more practical work. Usually in the last year, you do very little formal lecturing. All the work is done on what they call electives or rotations. And that's where you actually go and spend time in the university setting with vets or in private practice, working alongside vets to learn from them. So these programs are virtually the same for all the vet schools. They tend to have that sort of structure. As in all schools, during your coursework, you will be required to do a certain number of weeks on farms in the first couple of years and with vets in the later years. In the early years, that work will have to be done in your holidays. So if you're the type of person who wants to put your computer down the day holidays start for Christmas or in July or June and not pick it up again until you start, don't do vet science, because you got to do a lot of weeks. And the reason for that is that we want you to get experience of what it's like to be lambing sheep, what it's like to be a beef farmer, what it's like to be a dairy farmer. There's also a lot of focus in a vet program nowadays on what's called self-directed and group work. And what that essentially means is, when I qualified as a vet and went through vet school in the Middle Ages, we walked into a classroom, the lecturer stood up, and I think Dowie is probably old enough to be much the same thing. Certainly Julian's the same. Where the lecturer just stood up and gave a pile of lectures. You took the notes, you learned the notes, and you would try to pass the exam. Modern teaching is very different. And particularly for vet science, we expect students to be much better at problem solving than my generation. Because very often you have the knowledge at your fingertips in terms of handhelds or computer-based technologies. We're much more interested in how do you solve problems and how do you utilize the technology to solve that problem. Overall, we're governed by what is called a Day 1 competency framework, and that's essentially the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. They say what all graduates must be able to do when they graduate, by the time they graduate. And that's our Bible. They're quite general, they're not very specific, but they tell us what competencies you have to have, and over the 5 to 6 years of the program, that's what we try and drive through. What are we going to do specifically at Aberystwyth? So we've got a 5-year degree, and it's a joint degree. This is a very unusual animal. This is a combination of taking the strengths of 2 institutions and putting them to a common purpose. So in our degree, students will come for the first 2 years at Aberystwyth, and they will then do the following 3 years at the Royal Vet College. Now, some of the comments I get is, oh, wow, that sounds very scary. What's going to happen when I go to the Royal Vet College? I'm going to be in a small minority group. So let me answer that one immediately. The answer is not so. At the 3rd year in the Royal Vet College, all the students on their campus are new to that campus. So if you apply directly to the Royal Vet College and you're accepted, you will do your first 2 years in the centre of London, and you do your next 3 years at Hawkshead outside London at the main campus. So all the students starting in 3rd year are actually new to the Hawkshead campus. It might be that the RVC students have had more exposure, but still they've never been there permanently. They also take a lot more students there in 3rd year, as I said earlier, under their accelerated program. So a significant proportion of their class are students who've come either from overseas or who have done a science degree beforehand, and they only therefore do the following 3 years at RVC. So if you feel, oh, I'll be intimidated, I'll be new, yes, but so will everybody else be new at that time. What is nice about Aberystwyth here is because it's a joint degree, we can really emphasize the strengths of our institution, which is around large livestock production, and RVC can talk to their strengths, which is very much around equines and small animals, and that's what makes the combination so powerful. We will be taking in 25 students a year, and that's in line with the agreement with the RVC, so unfortunately we can't take it to 25 or 30, it's only 25. The positive side there, of course, is that we have a very small class, and therefore we get to know students and they get to know us, and there's a much more intimate atmosphere than you would find at a big school. The course itself will be in English, but we will be providing explicit Welsh medium support. So we're actually in the process of advertising as I speak for a Welsh-speaking veterinary lecturer. So this will be somebody who is completely fluent in Welsh, will be providing parallel support and some teaching and certainly group work and personal support in Welsh. So we really want to emphasize the Welsh focus because obviously it's a degree in Wales. And why come to us? Well, obviously the most important thing for you guys is students like Aberystwyth. I'm not going to fly all the flags. I've given you some references there. But students rate the university very highly. There's a really cool atmosphere. It's a small university, so you tend not to get lost. There's a huge social atmosphere. It's a small town that's very focused around students, and it's really just a very cool place to hang out. I know that might sound like your dad talking. I wish we could get somebody your age to come and tell you, but it really is a very nice experience. And the location is really, really cool. Aberystwyth guarantees residence accommodation. A lot of students stay in digs, in rented accommodation that they organize themselves. But if you don't like that or you're not sure, the university as a first year will guarantee you a place in a residence. They're really cool places. And the facilities of the university are very nice. So we're getting our own bespoke building created just for the veterinary class, where you'll do your dissections, you will work on animal models. What's very nice too about the university, and this was even different to my previous university, and I think pretty unusual in this country, is we have some really cool farms directly associated with the university. We have a large dairy unit, we have a sheep unit, we have beef, and we've also got an equestrian center right next to the university. And the nice thing about that means that you will have lots of exposure to animals from day one in your program. It also means that if you're into horses, you can actually bring, I understand, your horse to university. Can't bring it to class, I think. It might be a bit big. But you can certainly keep it here and use it in livery at the center. The other one to bear in mind is that the veterinary faculty is in the middle of a university. Most other schools, the vet faculty is away, and we are very keen that this happens to give you exposure to other courses. Sometimes the danger as a vet school is that it's like a production belt where we just churn out veterinarians. And I'm very keen that our students at Aberystwyth will get an opportunity to not only socialize with students from other backgrounds, but also to learn a little bit about other courses that you might not otherwise think of that will benefit you as a person. So in closing, Aberystwyth University, why do I think it's a great idea? Because I think you get the best of both worlds. We're a new kid on the block. We're just starting off. I have great hopes for the school. RVC is recognized now as certainly as the top school globally. So it's a wonderful route to do your first couple of years still in Wales, or come to Wales for its intimate environment, and then go to and finish off at a top school. And your certificate will read that you've qualified from both institutions. Okay, that's me. Bit of a rush, but I really want to keep time open for questions. So let's go for it. What do you think? Any questions?